In my city there is not much violence. That does not mean that it does not exist, but it is something uncommon. Everything here is calm. It has always been, of course. Sometimes there is a little drama, drugs, domestic violence, or some accident, but those are isolated cases. Most nights, the worst we deal with are drunk fights in some bar that get out of control. We can usually lock the responsible ones in the cell so they calm down. That is what we call a rough night. Although it is not unusual to have quiet days without receiving any calls, you cannot always count on everything to be calm, but sometimes it just is. And honestly, that is fine with me. I like the quiet. That is why I moved to a rural area of Ohio. There was a time when I was more of a city guy, but not anymore. My 20s are over, and so are my 30s. I got married and then widowed. I served my country in the army. I worked on major cases in bigger cities, and today I am music. Tired, not enough to leave everything, but yes, enough to settle for being a police deputy in a small town. I feel comfortable here. I feel comfortable in this role. In many ways, I've been doing this most of my life. Military life and life with a badge are not exactly the same, but they have a sense of purpose. Similar to the feeling that I'm doing something meaningful. I think that's what I need most. I need something to give me a reason to get up every morning. Maybe it's the soldier in me. My drill instructor in basic training used to say, "Soldiers keep going." I guess I took it seriously, and honestly, if I wasn't doing this job, I don't know what I would do with my time and skills. Maybe stay home and go crazy. No thanks. I'm not going to tell you the name of the town where I live, for reasons you'll understand later. It's better not to, but it's a small rural corner away from major roads. There are dense forests, lots of farmland, some warehouses by the river, and that's it. I've been in this job for 6 years. I can't say it's been the best 6 years of my life, but they haven't been the worst, either in total. There are 7 of us working in the local department, the sheriff, a day receptionist, another at night, 3 more deputies, and this city doesn't need more than that. Even with the new people that have arrived in the last 4 years, I have noticed that more people have arrived than usual, mainly those who work in the new stores along the river, although there are also new businesses in the center. When I moved here, the center was almost dead full of empty stores and closed shop windows. Today, there are new restaurants, a couple of bars, and even some condos. It's not a big growth, but it's something I have even visited some of these new places. The Honey Pot in Espinel is a decent pap with good food and good beer. Some of the older ones don't like that things are changing, but I personally see it as something. Well, people are bringing new life to this old city. How can that not be something positive? And the best thing is that the newcomers don't cause many problems, so I have nothing to complain. They keep the peace like everyone else. What more can I ask for? Until recently, I had my peace of mind, had a purpose, and until recently it was the closest thing to peace I had felt in a long time. The calls came in around 11 p.m. Many noticed a large fire on Joffrey Vickers's property, accompanied by a worrying amount of gunshots. Let me get something straight. We are in rural Ohio. Here, people shoot guns all the time on their property, and normally it's not a problem. People are free to do what they want, as long as it's legal and doesn't bother others. But Vickers didn't even seem to have a gun, much to shoot it. He was a skinny guy with messy blonde hair, plastic-framed glasses, and a clumsy smile. He worked in the office of one of the new stores as an IT guy or something like that. I had seen him a few times, usually at the Honey Pot and Spaniel getting a drink. But the few times we talked, was when I interviewed him about a couple of fights that got out of hand at the Honey Pot, and when I drove by his house looking for a boy who had disappeared. In this case, disappearing means he went fishing without telling his mom. So although gunshots are not usually suspicious, the shots at Becker's house were already suspicious. I had a bad feeling as I drove to his house, a feeling that got worse when I saw the fire. It was hard to miss even in the dark. The red flickering glow could be seen from miles away. The firemen were trying to put it out, but it seemed like a losing battle. The house was almost completely consumed by the fire. There was no way to save it. Luckily, Vickers did not seem to be in the fire. Unfortunately, the man was still dead. When I arrived, I saw some neighbors standing next to a body lying on the grass, several meters from the house. There was already another car there, and I distinguished the figure of the Deputy Sheriff Ethan Biggs among the neighbors. I parked next to his car and got out. I felt the heat of the fire on my face. As soon as I opened the door and approached Biggs silently, he looked at me, and I could see the naked corpse of Jeffrey Burrs lying and bloody in the grass. Jesus Christ, murmur. He was about 10 years younger than me, and he looked like a strong breeze could split him in two, but he had guts. I always liked him. That's why I've seen many disasters in my life. But this God, where do we begin? I looked at the neighbors who were there. I recognized Sidney and Loretta Mason standing a few meters away, and the old lady Brenda Roberts a little more distance. Big noticed that I was watching them. I already talked to them. The Masons didn't see much, but Robert, yes. Oh yes, you have his statement, I asked, and Big made a somewhat strange expression. Yes, I do. Something in his tone struck me as odd. Exasperated would be the correct word. What is it? I asked him. I'm not sure how much what he said will help us. Why are you saying that? I insisted. Vig shook his head. I don't even know where to begin. Honestly, you should hear it firsthand. Don't worry. I already covered the body and called the coroner. I raised an eyebrow, wondering what the hell Mrs. Roberts had said to make him react like that. I looked over to where the old lady was wringing her hands as she looked at the fire that was still burning, and tensed up a little when I approached. Good night, Brenda, I said. Deputy Vicks mentioned that maybe you saw something. I said what I saw. He replied bitterly, I know, but now I ask you, what do you think I'm going to change my story just because you ask? I saw what I saw. I'm sure I do. But I need to know what you saw to better understand what happened to the Lord Beckers. Mrs. Roberts snorted. Already. I told the Deputy Vicks those men shot him. What men? I asked. I didn't get a good look at them. I only heard the shots while I was on the porch. Sometimes I hear shots from the house downstairs when Mr. Coulson takes his son to practice. But Vickers wasn't that type. I didn't think I'd find this mess here. He shook his head, and I gave him a moment to gather his thoughts before continuing. There were 5, maybe 6. Like I said, I didn't get a good look at them. I just saw shadows by the fire, but they didn't have pellet guns. Their weapons were automatic. And that thing that they were shooting at, he paused. Another thing. I asked him, an animal. At least it looked like an animal, maybe a bear, but it was bigger than any bear I've ever seen around here. And its silhouette wasn't that of a bear. It looked more like a coyote. Plus it was fast, agile. Those men were attacking the animal. I asked yes, but it kept lunging at them. They had it surrounded, and they didn't stop shooting at it. It didn't take long for it to fall. They killed him. I frowned, looking at Vickers' yard. I would have thought I would see a dead bear out there. The seer, the head, the body is gone. Idiot, She snorted now. It's just Baker's lying there. I stopped and looked at her again. Excuse me, when the men left, I watched from the woods and called the police. When I looked back, the animal was gone, and in its place was Vicar stretched out. Despite how strange what he said sounded, his expression was very serious. Suddenly I understood why Vix wanted him to tell me the story straight up. If he had told it to me, he would have asked him to be more realistic and stop the nonsense. I understand. Well, I'm going to take a look at the body. Then I said, walking away in silence. I heard her scoff as I left, meeting Vix. She looked at me with a knowing smile. Now you understand. She said. I figured I answered. So what really killed him? I asked in the firelight. It was hard to see, but Vickers looked like he had been shot a lot. Though it was hard to determine the caliber of the bullets, my instinct told me that Mrs. Roberts was right in saying that they used automatic weapons. Someone clearly wanted this man dead. Big seemed to have come to that conclusion, too. I found some 5.56 shells in the grass, he said. So at least as for the automatic rifles, I understand Masons also described the shots the same way. Well, let's take Mrs. Roberts to the police station to continue with her statement, I suggested, and once they put out the fire, maybe we'll find something in the house. Maybe he said Vix. Although this doesn't look like an accident, it feels like a hit. Yes, have you seen anything like this before? I stood up and looked at the burning house. The firemen were already starting to control the fire. No, I've never seen anything like this. This is something totally new. I saw the coroner's car approach and Dr. Miller get out. He looked at the fire, and his expression turned grim as if he already knew that I would find photographers at the scene and let the coroner do his job. Vix nodded, and we got to work. We stayed up almost all night. We took all the bullet casings, we reviewed the statements from Mrs. Roberts and the Masons, and looked for any other clues as to who might have been behind this attack. One of the drawbacks of being a police officer in a small town is that there are no specialized departments. When I worked in the city, yes, I knew each team handled their area, drug trafficking, homicides, etc. In a small town, you do everything. The only thing we can't handle is a complex homicide, which requires more personnel than we have. Even so, we tried to gather as much evidence as possible for whoever the state police sent to investigate. When the fire went out, Vix and I combed the ruins of Vickers's property. Although there wasn't much more than the body and the casings, everything pointed to a clean job, quick and brutal, almost looked like a military thing. Reconstructing what happened wasn't exactly my job, but I couldn't help but put the pieces together. The attackers probably burned down the house to get him out. When he got out, they killed him in cold blood. Why didn't he know Vickers didn't seem like anyone that he made enemies? But I didn't know him well either. Nobody dies so violently without having some secret. Dr. Miller called us into his office the next day, around 1 p.m. Big and I arrived a little early, and we waited for him in his office. It was a somewhat messy place, but with a lot of personality drawings by his children decorated a wall, along with a couple of medals that identified him as a veteran. Above them hung a simple crucifix, a sign of faith. Despite his morbid profession, Dr. Miller came in. 5 minutes later, he was a robust man, usually happy, but that day he looked gloomy. I guess it's late to ask if he'll survive. Right. Doc joked Vix. Dr. Miller barely looked at him. It's an interesting case you have here. He said, I haven't seen wounds like that since my days in the army. I'm not telling you anything new by saying that we know how he died. But there's something else in this body that I want you to see. He led us to the autopsy table, where Vickers's body was cut open. Vig shuddered. Seeing him, Jesus murmured. Dr. Miller pointed to some marks on his ribs from Vickers' healed fractures. But look at these. They are consistent along the ribs. He pointed to some discolorations on the bone, as if they had been broken and reformed. What does this mean? I asked. I'm not sure. I've never seen anything like this. It seems as if his bones break regularly and reform. But that's not. It should be possible. Vig intervened. It's not. It has to be something else, maybe a medical condition. I checked his medical records. There's nothing that explains this, nothing. This doesn't make sense. It's as if his skeleton has remodeled itself completely. Vix and I stared at him uneasy. Remodeled his skeleton. I repeated. I don't have a better way to describe it. But to have fractures like that, his bones would have had to have broken down regularly. B frowned, looking at the body. I saw how he frowned. I could almost see the gears in his head turning. Let's say, his bones were doing that. He said after a few moments, what would it look like? What would it look like if that's what was going on? I can't even begin to speculate. Dr. Miller said with a sigh. Any other irregularities on his body? I asked Vix. Countless. Actually, his lungs and his heart have similar scar tissue, although it's not that noticeable. I also noticed some scarring on his muscles, although nothing on his skin, oddly his skin. It's about the only part of him that doesn't have a lot of scars, except the bullet wounds, of course. Big nodded thoughtfully. I've made some calls and sent pictures of the x-rays to some colleagues, but I don't expect much of a response. I'll keep going through his medical records, looking for an explanation, but I don't promise anything good. Thanks anyway. Keep us posted on what you find, right? Dr. Miller, I asked. As soon as I know something new, you will be the first one I call. He said, before pausing. I have to ask off the record. I imagine they haven't figured out why he was killed yet. Right? That's a question for the state police. I answered. Understand. Well, I can only speculate based on what I see here. But with unnatural scars, I'd be inclined to wonder if there was some kind of connection. Dr. Miller, I asked. I was an Army medic. Assistant. Sawyer. This isn't the first time I've seen what hollow point bullets 5.56 can do to a body. Plus I've lived in this town long enough to know that no one around here has that kind of weaponry. Like I said, this is off the record, but whoever killed Vickers probably wasn't local. I don't know what kind of life he led before this, but I can't imagine there isn't some connection between his scars and his manner of death, said Dr. Miller, shrugging. It's just for thought. As Vix and I walked out of the morgue, I noticed the thoughtful expression on her face. Somehow I already knew what she was thinking. I didn't say as bluntly as I could. What do you mean by no question big? I mean, I don't know what you're thinking. And it's ridiculous, Rick. If all the evidence points in that direction, maybe we should consider the possibility. I would, if that possibility wasn't absurd. I replied. The lady said she saw a large animal in Becker's yard, an animal that our men shot and killed. Only when she looked at the body, it wasn't an animal anymore. It was Vickers. I know the old lady is a little out of it, but she's not completely crazy. You and I talked to her. We both questioned her. Her story didn't change. And now this scarring, I said, doesn't prove anything old. Fractures in her bones. That Dr. Miller can't explain. Dr. Miller is a coroner from a small town, BX. I like him, really. He's a good man. But he's not exactly a medical authority. Well, he knows a lot more about this than you. Or I know it sounds impossible. Rick that it is but a face reality, and say it because it's impossible. Then explain to me why. It's looking more and more like Joffrey Vickers was a fucking werewolf. I shook my head in disbelief. Come on. Vix insisted. Make this all make sense. Rick, give me some other logical explanation, please, because I don't want to tell the state troopers that we're investigating the murder of Lon Chaney Jr. over here more than you. Let's just calm down. I said I get it. Right now. None of this makes a lot of sense. But let's not start jumping to conclusions, okay? We don't even have to solve this case. The homicides are the responsibility of the state police, and when they come to take this case away from us, we'll give them the facts that we have. Okay, we'll give them the testimony. We'll give them Dr. Miller's conclusions. And we'll say, this is weird. No. Then we'll let them get to the bottom of this, and when they do, there will be a much more logical explanation than werewolves. Understood? Understood. Big paused for a moment before nodding. He still had an expression hard to describe. How it explains exactly the look of, I'm not ready to let go of my werewolf theory. Yet it's been a long day. I sighed. Your shift is almost over. No, yes, that's right. Why don't you go home and get some rest? I'll take care of everything. Okay. He nodded and sighed. Yes, no, I haven't slept in a long time, before I got the call from Vickers. Exactly so. Go. Get some rest. And you asked, arching an eyebrow. I haven't been on shift that long. I can last a few more hours with some coffee. Don't worry. Vic nodded again, and after a moment he patted me on the shoulder. Okay, you'll call me, if it comes up naturally. Now go home and sleep. He turned around and walked back to his car. I could see the tension in his shoulders as he walked away. He seemed exhausted. I honestly didn't blame him. I was dead tired, too. After the disaster of the Vickers case, at least I hoped the rest of the day would be calm for the most part. That's how it was. I spent the rest of my shift compiling a full report for whoever the state police sent to investigate the death of Vickers. When 5 p.m. came around, I was about to call it a day, even though, technically, I had only been on shift since 7 a.m. The call from Vickers had taken priority, so in reality, I had been on duty since 11 p.m. My head hurt, and I desperately needed sleep. All I could think about was getting home, laying down in bed and passing out. All I had to do was finish filing, and then the second, music. Applause. Music call. Came shots fired on the south side of town. Automatic rifles, just like in the case. Vickers' sleep would have to wait. This was priority. I took off in my patrol car. As soon as we got the call, heading full speed to the address they had given us. I didn't know the residents of that house. Well, they had never formally introduced us, but I knew they were relatively new to town. That house had been built just a year ago, and had been purchased before it was finished. Unlike the Beckers, this house had not burned down. In fact, I would say things seemed deceptively quiet. As I drove down the gravel driveway, a quaint, rustic mailbox with the Rassels' name on it sat at the entrance where the driveway met the road. As my car pulled up to the house, I saw no signs of life as I parked. I drew my gun slowly and watched the house carefully. The lights were on, and the door was slightly ajar. I checked the car radio. Central, how long until backup arrives? Deputy LZ, 20 minutes sower. We also have Big and Sherry Smith. No ETA yet. 20 minutes? Not ideal. If there were any injuries there, they would be dead in 20 minutes. I cursed. I quietly said, I'm going in to take a look. There are no signs of suspects in the place. I said I didn't wait for an answer, and I went to the door. I moved slowly, very slowly. I kept the gun raised when I got to the front door, and I pushed it. I found a house that looked like it had been shaken completely. There had been a fight here. It had been a tremendous fight. I entered the hall with the gun raised, looking for signs of life. Nothing. I noticed bloodstains on the floor that led to the kitchen, and I followed them. Hesitating before crossing the door. "Hi," I called. "I'm Deputy Rick Sower." There was no answer. The mess in the kitchen was even worse. There had clearly been some kind of fight. There was a large pool of blood behind the counter, and I ran to investigate. Lying on the kitchen floor was the body of a man. He looked to be about 40 years old, pale skin and gray hair. He was wearing a suit and looked like he had been shot several times. I took his pulse, hoping he was still alive. But no, I found nothing. Another victim out of the corner of my eye. I saw empty shells on the floor and picked up a 5.56 hollow point, like the ones at Vickers' house. I looked back and stood up, grabbing the central radio. "We have a dead body on the site. Male, around 40 years old." I heard a crack behind me and turned around, picking up the gun. I saw a door that led to the basement, and it looked like it had been splintered. There was a lot of blood on the floor nearby, blood that was too far from the body of the man I had found. "Hi." I called again and took a few steps toward the basement door. I stepped over the splintered remains and looked toward the stairs. I saw some blood on the steps, but not too much. "Hi." I started to go down, but stopped when I heard movement. The basement was unfinished, but there was a light on in a room over, and I saw a shadow move in front of that light. "I'm from the local police. I'm Deputy Rick Sawyer," I yelled. There was no answer. I took a moment to think. Going down, I was just reckless. Someone was clearly there, a survivor down there. Maybe he could be hurt. Reinforcements. Maybe it wasn't the best option. My instinct told me that the gunmen were already gone. Most likely they wouldn't just wait in a basement for the police to arrive. I went down another step. "I'm going down," I warned. As I reached the cement floor, I heard moving footsteps and followed them. I entered the next room, just in time to see a dark-haired woman running away through another door. "Wait," I screamed, trying to reach her. Whoever it was didn't get very far. She cornered herself in the next room and turned to me, with her face full of panic. I could hear her breathing frantically, see the terror in her eyes, and the still fresh blood running from her mouth, down her dress. She wasn't sobbing. "No, get away, lady. I'm here to help," I tried to say, but she saw an opening to my left and ran towards it. I grabbed her, trying to stop her. And I think that was the biggest mistake I made. I could have done what happened after. What happened after was my fault. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. I should have handled things differently. I should have realized what I was doing was a mistake. But in the heat of the moment, I didn't think I thought that woman was hurt. I knew she was scared, but I grabbed her anyway. And in doing so, I ruined everything. She screamed in panic, struggling with me. At first, she was much stronger than she seemed with the way she struggled. I thought she would break my arms, but I held her tightly, trying in vain to calm her down. When she realized I wasn't going to escape, she turned on me. I only caught a glimpse of her fangs when she opened her mouth, but that was all I needed. It was like those seconds before a car accident, when everything happens so fast and so slow. At the same time that her teeth were not normal, her canines were longer, more prominent. I could see an animal bloodlust in her eyes, and then I realized that blood in her dress. It wasn't hers. It belonged to the last idiot who had tried to stop her. She lunged at me, sinking her fangs into my throat. I screamed in pain as she threw me to the ground. The bite radiated a pain intense and hard to describe. I felt my blood gushing into her mouth as she hit me against the ground for a moment. I felt her hesitate. I saw her swallow the blood for an instant. Her eyes seemed to wonder if I wanted more, but instead she leaned back, and using her enormous strength, she ripped the gun out of my hands. I tried to speak. I tried to scream at her, but she was already running again. I put a hand to my neck and tried to stand up, but my legs didn't respond. She was gone. I heard her run up the stairs. Her footsteps echoed throughout the house as she tried to escape. Then I heard the shot. It suddenly echoed, reverberating throughout the house. The thud of a body falling to the ground came almost immediately. It was Lopez who shot her. Lopez found me in the basement, bleeding and barely able to. Nensiant told me that he had seen the bloody woman come out of the kitchen, that he saw the gun in her hand, and reacted, thinking it was a matter of life or death. She went down with a single shot, and that was it. Later we identified her as Patricia Russell, the wife of the man killed in the kitchen, Hankar. And if she was Patricia Russell, that meant we had just killed our only witness, a witness who had bitten my neck like a vampire, a witness who had vampire fangs. I didn't want to believe it. The idea seemed completely impossible. I wanted to believe there was a more logical explanation for this than to have it. My more rational side knew it, but I couldn't explain what I had just seen, or the state of Vickers's body. Big's words echoed in my mind. If all the evidence points in that direction, maybe we should open ourselves to the possibility. I didn't want to open myself to that possibility. I wanted there to be another answer. Hell, there probably was, there had to be. But there is only so much evidence a man can ignore before having to admit that sometimes impossible things can be true.